All right, so Luke Cage makes his way into the Ultimate Universe, and let me tell you, this story is absolutely phenomenal. Now, we are following up here on the Ultimates with issue number 9 here by Dennis Camp. Now, initially, we start off here in February 2005 at the Seagate Penitentiary, and we see a young Luke Cage asking the question, 1 year to life? And how he's only 15 years old. Now, the man that he's talking to responds back to him and tells him that it's actually very progressive and how you could be out in as soon as 1 year, and how previously this would have carried a mandatory 5-year sentence. But the thing about this is that Luke Cage doesn't know what he's being convicted of, and the man that's across from him doesn't know what he's being convicted of either. He just lets him know that this was an administrative trial and how he doesn't need the details and how he's not even a lawyer. So it's like, who is this man that's giving him information anyways? Now, while Luke Cage is trying to ask some more questions, the guy kind of gets agitated and it's like, I don't really want to get into a whole discussion about it. And now he's just there to tell him what's happening and how Carl Lucas, aka Luke Cage, is going to be going away for a while and how he shouldn't look so glum. I'm like, can you imagine that, guys? Hey, you're going to prison for a year, but don't look so glum about it, because it's only going to be 1 year and he'll be out before he knows it, which of course lets us know that it's going to be much longer than that, right? Considering that at the very top they said it could be 1 year to life. Now, what's different about this Luke Cage here is that this is a little bit of a variation, right, from what the 616 Luke Cage was sent to prison for. Now, similar to this one, Luke Cage did get sent to Seagate, and also it was because of not any wrongdoing on his part. It was all because his friend Willis Stryker felt some type of way because the woman that they both liked, Reva Connors, decided to be with Luke Cage instead. So Willis became vindictive and planted some drugs in Carl's apartment, tipped off the police, which then led to Luke Cage going to Seagate prison, and it is ultimately what set up Luke Cage being experimented on in prison and later on gaining superhuman strength. Now, we don't know the specific reason here why he was sent to prison, but we do know that he's going to prison here at Seagate. So the next time that we see Luke Cage here, we fast forward all the way to February 2025, so 20 years later, and he's at this place called the Gordium Correctional Facility. Now, as he's walking in, it's mentioned here that this correctional facility is a Midas Group penitentiary specializing in the for-profit prison space, which is just a wild statement within itself. Now, what's interesting here is that it's mentioned as a Midas Group, and if you remember earlier on in the series, we did see Midas. He was the one that was in that gold suit at the White House, and in the basement of the White House, that is where we met and saw Ultimate America Chavez. Now, the men that we see here walking him in, and also the men that are inside the facility, you can see that they have these like goldish yellow suits as well, right? And they have this M that is on their shoulders, which most likely, I'm assuming, stands here for Midas. I just kind of wanted to point out here that they look very similar to like the AIM hazmat suit, so Midas could have basically represented what AIM is here for this particular universe. Also, if we do look in the background here behind Luke Cage, we see a woman, and in all honesty, like I initially thought, I was like, is that like Misty Knight? Because she kind of resembles Misty Knight here a little bit, but nothing really materializes from seeing her in the background, so let's just move on. Now, one of the men here from the Midas Group on the inside mentions to the another one that's there, he's like, hey, did you hear about this riot that went on in New Brunswick? And he continues on to say that they're trying to keep it hush-hush, but he heard that the inmates are still in control of the facility, and then it's later mentioned how that's the second facility this year. Now, as we continue on here in this issue, they do flash back and forth often between the Seagate Penitentiary with Luke Cage and then also the current facility that he's in right now, the Gordium. Now, when we get our second flashback here to Seagate, we see the treatment that Luke Cage was getting, and of course the beatings that he's taken as well, and we can see that it's from the same guys here from the Midas Group. So from a young age onward, Luke Cage would experience beatings and mistreatment while in prison. So then when we jump back here to the present time, we see Luke Cage punched this guy straight in the face. And when you look down, you see that he was carrying a knife. And the reason why Luke Cage did this was to try and save another one of the inmates that was there, because he was charging to another inmate. And when Luke Cage introduces himself, the other guy says, "My name is Danny Rand." And I'm like, yo, this got me a little hyped, because I'm like, Danny Rand, Luke Cage, the relationship. I'm like, are we gonna get a potential Heroes for Hire team here in the Ultimate Universe? Don't get me excited, okay? But Danny, he asks Luke Cage, he's like, "Do I know you from somewhere?" And he asks him again, he's like, "Have you ever done any time in Seagate?" So then Luke Cage responds back, he's like, "Yeah, I've done time all over." So as they follow up with their conversation on what just took place, Luke Cage asks Danny, he's like, "What was this all about?" So Danny responds back, he's like, "Honestly, bro, I have no idea. In this place, it's easy to offend someone without meaning to or even knowing." And then he continues to let Luke know, he's like, "Listen, I appreciate your help, but just a word of advice, my guy, like from someone who's been here for a while, mind your own business and watch your own back, because no one's going to watch it for you." And then Luke Cage gives that sinister smile while he's like tossing up an apple at the same time. He's like, "Nah, man, that ain't really my style." So then we jump back here to another flashback here over at Seagate, and we see Luke Cage once again getting beat up on by people from the Midas group. And then we see Luke Cage going through a series of books. Now, I couldn't really make out the first one that he was reading here, but the other books that he was reading, one of them is called The Soledad Brother. Now, the Soledad Brother is related to George Jackson, who was one of the Soledad brothers that was a part of 3 inmates accused of killing a prison guard at California Soledad Prison in the 1970s. And what happened here is that his writings, George's writings, especially his prison letters, were collected in this book, The Soledad Brother, and this book became highly influential among activists and readers interested in the issues of prison reform and racial injustice. And then this next book that we see him reading here is called Discipline and Punish. Now, this book here is from Michel Foucault. I'm probably saying the name wrong, I apologize, but it was an exploration here of how punishment evolved from harsh public displays of power to a modern system that was based on surveillance and control. And in this book, he argues that today's prisons, and by extension, many social institutions, exert power by inducing self-discipline through constant observation through a particular model, which was by a circular prison layout with a central watchtower where a guard can observe all inmates without being seen. And it was believed that this constant surveillance would encourage inmates to regulate their own behavior as they would never know when they're being watched. Now, all of this is essentially setting the stage for what Luke Cage does in this particular issue. Now, when we jump back here to the present, we do see this message that's going over the intercom here over at Gorgium facility, and it mentions how they're innovating their way to a better tomorrow, and how one of Midas's many innovations in the penal space, is it penal or penal? So y'all let me know in the comments, but it's mentioned here that it's a mandatory worker employment program, which once again, just funny. Now, it's here where we see Luke Cage talking to Danny and letting him know what is happening here is modern day slavery, nothing less. Like, who you kidding, right? In the facility, intercom continues and says that inmates have a chance to learn useful skills, and Midas subsidiaries have access to an almost inexhaustible pool of labor. Then it concludes by saying how the Midas way is the right way. Now, Luke Cage continues to talk to a few men here that are gathering with him, because there's now Danny Rand and another man that's with him here. And you will see here that this group continues to grow as they go throughout their days. And he says to these men while they're playing chess, he's like, slavery is social death. It is to be forever cut off from your context and community. It is to have never been born. They have made us into non-people explicitly. And then later on, as the group grows, he says, they say it's about justice. They say it's about the law. It's not about any of that ish. So Danny asks a question. He's like, so what's it all about then? And I love this line right here, because Luke Cage responds back and says, it's about power, man. And of course, there's a play on words here for Luke Cage's alias, aka Power Man. And then we get another flashback here to Seagate. And one of Midas's men says to Luke Cage, we hear you're a real go-getter, forming your own prison gang. And as Luke Cage tries to run away a little bit here, or he gets hit with another stick, he replies back, he's like, yo, it's just reading, my guy. But of course, they don't believe him. And as they continue to beat him, they say to him, you're a troublemaker, a dangerous element. It's in your file. It's in your file since you were born. And this is basically just a reminder here that the Maker, as we know, has files on every potential hero. So while in this universe, Luke Cage ends up in prison, this was ultimately here facilitated by, we can only guess, the Maker himself, to make sure that Luke Cage never becomes Power Man, which is the reason why, as you'll see, it wasn't because of the experiment within the prison as to the reason why Luke Cage gets his powers, because the Maker would have made sure that that did not happen in the first place. So as we jump back here into the present, we see Luke Cage still at this chessboard talking, and he mentions how there are no good pigs and how it doesn't matter the color of your skin or what god you worship. The only distinction that matters in here is between the pigs and the prisoners, the guards and the inmates, us and them. And now the only guards, and how the guards are our only enemies. Their most immediate struggle is them, and through them, the unjust system that they uphold. We struggle for nothing more and nothing less than control over our own lives. And if we are to succeed in our struggle, you have to fight for the life of the man next to you as if it were your own, which it is, because believe me, if they come for him one morning, they'll be coming for you that night. And it's in this moment here where we get to see the beginning of how Luke Cage became Luke Cage, because we flash back here to Seagate in January 2024, the time when Tony and Doom set back the start boxes to create the heroes that the Maker had prevented from coming into existence. And while some inmates are wondering about how many times Cage has been to the infirmary and how many broken bones he's had, and one of them even says the words, they say that he's unbreakable, while we see the start box land inside of Luke Cage's quarters. And as we then jump right back to the present, we see Luke Cage say again, the people, whether inside these walls or outside, have no control over their lives, but we can take control first of this facility and then of our future. The only difference between the inside and the outside is the one of maximum security and one is minimum. And we see him with this map of the prison here, and he mentions how there are some weak points here and there. And then he continues on later to say that the system cannot stand, the world can no longer afford it, it never could, and how it cannot be reformed. The system resists reform, but must be transformed in the revolutionary sense. And while he's saying this, you can see members of the Midas group looking at their gathering as Luke Cage continues to say, we must take power back for the people, many of whom will be at first afraid of us, and that's okay. And then he says, we go tomorrow. We're going to scare them, not to death, but to life. And in this moment, we get another flashback here to that same time in January 2024 in Seagate, where we see Tony Stark appear to Luke Cage, and he mentions to him, this box is for him, and how this box is an iconic catalyst that would allow him to gain unbreakable skin and unbelievable strength. And we see Luke Cage take the item from that box, and then we see him begin to go through the transformation, as Tony says, exercise in creating a society that could be perfectly directed and controlled, and together we will free the world. And then when we jump back to the present, that is when we see Luke Cage's plan for this particular facility about to be enacted. And while he and the other men were going to be a part of this prison break, but then what seems like a wrench here gets thrown into their plans, because next we see Luke Cage and the other men, they're chained up. And then we hear one of Midas's men say, a prison break? You thought you could hide a prison break from us? And he continues on by saying, he's like, you can't trust criminals. If any of you could be trusted, you wouldn't be criminals, would you? Now, this implies here that most likely one of the prisoners probably tipped them off as to what was going to happen. And we see here that they bring all the prisoners and line them up, basically what looks like an execution style. And one of Midas's men continues, he's like, see, it's your nature. That's why you're in here. Just because you break a law doesn't make you a criminal, and you don't have to break a law to be a criminal. A criminal is just something that you are, something you were. Midas's man continues, he's like, in cases like attempted escapes, building riots, it's a strict modest policy to use lethal force to discourage recidivism. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't fill you with holes, convict. And he continues on to say, but I'll tell you what, I'm not ashamed to say it. I love my job. And he starts to fire off rounds at Luke Cage. But the one good thing in this moment is that they're only targeting Luke Cage. So the bullets, they're just bouncing off. But before that could continue, we jump back to another flashback at Seagate, where we see Tony saying, they stole your future, robbed you of your destiny. Do you want it back? And then we jump back to the present again, where we see more of Midas's men firing off rounds. And once again, those bullets, they can't touch Luke Cage, or they're touching him, but they're bouncing off. And that's when Luke Cage says, all right, gentlemen, we're taking over now. And once again, before we could continue to see what's going on in the present, we jump back to Seagate in January 2024. And we see Luke Cage breaking through a wall. And he mentions to these men, we are taking Seagate. We are taking the prison. And he screams loudly, all power to the people, while you hear the other inmates in unison say, all power to the people. Now, back in the present time, that's exactly the same thing that's happening again. As one of Midas's men mentions, he just flexed and broke all of their chains. But before they could continue, Luke Cage takes those men out. And then Luke Cage says, follow the plan. All power to the people. All power to the people. Then one last time, we get another flashback here to the Seagate Penitentiary. But this time, it's in June 2024, 6 months later from when he got his powers. And this is significant because this is when Tony was beginning to bring in new members to the Ultimates team. And he shows up this time in person to Luke Cage. And he says, congratulations on taking the prison and freeing yourself. And welcome to the Ultimates. You're one of the very few of the first generation who worked out, because as we remember, some of those boxes, or I should say a lot of those boxes, did not work out for a lot of the heroes. But then he continues on, he's like, we can get you out of here, Luke Cage. But then Luke Cage rejects the idea because he's like, I think I can actually do more good inside than out. And of course, Tony is like, I don't understand. After all you've endured. But then Luke Cage responds back, he's like, it's because of all that I've endured that I know I can't get free until everybody's free. And it's in this moment where we see Luke Cage going into New Brunswick Correctional Facility, which was a Midas Group facility. That same facility that was mentioned when he joined Gordium Correctional Facility at the very top. The same facility that those Midas men were talking about. And we see again, all power to the people as Luke Cage celebrates their victory at the Gordium Correctional Facility. Now, before we end this off here, we have to go check in on something that's going on exactly at the same time in February 2025. Now, while this prison break was being broadcasted on the news, we jump back here to the Triskelion satellite where She-Hulk and Doom are. This is where we see She-Hulk looking into Tony Stark that is in that chamber. And she mentions how Doom says that Tony cannot hear and how she's only wasting her breath, but there's no one else to talk to, and how Doom doesn't know everything. And she wanted to tell him that whatever he's feeling, whatever pain, torment, or desire to escape, that he has to stay strong because it will pass. She knows pain because when she began her transformation, she spent weeks listening to her bones being broken and reforming, her flesh torn apart and growing back and again, and how she threw up her own lungs, how she felt new organs grow and rearrange themselves inside of her. Her belly was a pit of snakes in agony, how she knows pain, she knows fear, and how she knows that part of him, or Tony, wishes to give up. That part of her did too, but she is encouraging Tony not to, because what brought her back was promise, and how she must return to her people, how they need her right now, and now this is the reason why he cannot die, and how Tony made her a promise. He made all of the Ultimates a promise, and how she knows that he will keep it. And as she walks away, in the very last second, we see Tony's eyes open up, the words saying 9 months remaining, which is just how long we have before the Maker breaks out of that dome. Listen, there was a lot to like here about this particular issue. Number one, Luke Cage was absolutely amazing. So many good times from this entire issue. I should say so many good lines from this entire issue overall. And the fact that in the end, he decides not to go with the Ultimates, but to continue to do his work from within was very much the nature of Luke Cage, right? Personally, I love how they're continuing to expand on this Ultimate Universe, and I'm looking forward to seeing if we ever do get to see a Heroes for Hire team here in the Ultimate Universe. What were your thoughts? Leave it down below in the comments. Also, if you could leave a like on this video here for the YouTube algorithm, subscribe if you are new to the channel. Also, if you're looking for a way to support us here on the channel, we do have our Patreon membership program here, and the link is going to be down below in the description. Now, within our Patreon membership program here, there are additional perks that you can get, part of which is an exclusive access here within our Discord, opportunities to select liked what we cover here on the channel, access to future giveaways, and more. And if you also just want to support us, we do have our lowest tier that's there for just $1 a month. We appreciate you so much for watching, and as always, thank you so much for kicking it with Keepin the Comic. Bye.